Hi, welcome to My Favorite Mistake. I'm your host, Mark Graven. Our guest today is Angie Callen, founder of Career Benders, host of the No More Mondays podcast, and author of the upcoming or newly released book, I should say, Scary Good, Discovering Life Beyond the Sunday Scaries. That was released January 8th. Before I tell you a little bit more about Angie, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Thank you for having me. I am excited both to be here and for all of the aforementioned things that have just come out into the world. So Thanks for having me.
Congratulations and Happy New Year. Angie is an engineer turned career coach who helps high-performing professionals rethink success when the path they followed stops feeling right. So maybe those are mistakes. Her work and her book focus on what happens when plans fall apart and how confidence is built through action, not perfection. Well, that sounds like a perfect fit for the themes on this podcast, Angie.
Yeah. I have many mistakes that I could choose to be my favorite because every single one of them led somewhere.
Yeah.
And it's a very fitting conversation for sure.
Yeah. Well, we've all made mistakes. And a lot of guests say it is difficult to answer the question. So I'll go ahead and throw the key main question right at you here. What's your favorite mistake and why?
Well, and I mentioned before we started recording, this has actually been floating around in my head on and off all day because there's several that I could choose from. And it's funny because when you say it's my favorite mistake, then it almost is like, well, am I saying I regret it and I wish it didn't happen? And then you like start psychologically evaluating, like, what does it mean for that to be my favorite mistake? But ultimately, I think the one that really set the stage was choosing to go to engineering school. And I say that because, I call myself a former engineer who loves people. Yes, that is exactly as weird as it sounds, but that's also why the word former is in front of engineer. But there's a lot of reasons why I love that mistake and I actually would make it again, to be honest, which is why I'm like, is it actually a mistake? But ultimately, it is the favorite not fitting thing that I did in life.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask questions. I'm an engineer. I almost got out of engineering as a student. I almost completely bailed on the engineering school to go study business and economics. So I'd just be curious to explore, one way of thinking about a mistake. It doesn't mean, a tragedy or a disaster or a regret, but it turned out apparently different than you thought. So why choose engineering school back when you did?
I went to engineering school because and this is all, it's so interesting as a newly published author. It's really interesting to talk about things I've just written about because it gives me it's a really interesting relationship for any of you out there. And obviously I would not have the book I have had I not been a former engineer who loves people. So that's one of the reasons it's my favorite mistake. But one of the reasons the primary reason I went to engineering school is because my dad was my math teacher in high school.
Was he is he an engineer?
No, he is. Okay. He was a 40-year tenured high school math teacher.
Okay.
And he was so as my math teacher, and most people are like, ugh. And I'm like, I liked math. So it was fun. And I had him for all of the accelerated classes. And this is something I talk about in the book. As a high performer, in hindsight, I recall, it took a little while for me to realize this. I remember being very self-conscious about the fact that I did not have a clear career vocation or aspiration as an 18-year-old. I now understand why that was the case, and it's because they don't teach entrepreneurship in Podunkville, Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
But ultimately, when I was in lacking some desire of my own, my dad says to me, "And you're good at math and science. Why don't you go to engineering school?" Okay, don't want to disappoint my dad and have no better idea. Might as well listen to you. And in researching engineering disciplines, I chose civil engineering because, not joking, it's the one where you get to talk to people the most.
You think so?
Yeah.
I think that's why
according to my research, that was the case.
Okay. Because, I think of civil engineering, projts and construction. And I remember friends of mine who were like music majors looking at the course catalog and flipping through. And there was a course in the civil engineering department called literally concrete, which they thought was hilarious. But
that was a really fun class, by the way.
Fast. It's kind of a liquid, right? Concrete,
or
it is.
How nerdy do you want to get? Because it's actually cement, aggregate, and water. So it's cement, rocks, and water mixed up as concrete. So when you hear somebody refer to a sidewalk as cement, they're wrong.
It's concrete.
There's your fun fact of the day. Yes.
That's why I'm not a civil engineer. I should have asked instead of
in concrete. And see, these are the fun facts that are like, hey, I'm glad I went to engineering school, because there's also, and I know so much more about myself now, which is why in a way going to engineering school was a mistake because of what I know about myself, but I could only work with what I had at the time.
Yeah.
And I realized that one, it was a more communication based engineering because of the level of collaboration and projects. And that part I actually kind of sort of enjoyed. But I also realized that there was a certain level of applicability in that real world aspect of it that is still something that is weaved into me today.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's where, a mistake quite often brings unexpected benefits career-wise. Did you pursue an engineering, a job with engineer in the job title right out of school? Like, how long did you stick with that before you thought, oh, this is not really the right path?
Yeah. And that's where there's some like meant to be set wheels in motion kind of stuff. That is why it's my favorite mistake. I, like you, almost changed my major in college. But when you go to Carnegie Mellon and you study engineering and you pay for it yourself, you don't change your major when you're a junior. The only thing I could have changed to at that point in time was math, and I didn't want to be a teacher, and data science wasn't a thing yet. So it basically was like there were, again, no options, and I stuck with it. And I actually practiced for about 7 or 8 years, primarily in like land development. I did a lot of construction, and after college, I moved to Boston, and I learned how to ski in New England, came to Colorado on vacation and was like, why the hell am I driving I-95 to Maine to ski when I could live out here? And I got to transfer here through the company that I worked for. So that was a little bit of the full circle of like, hey, look what this supported as far as like a whole new world of lifestyle that then set some wheels in motion.
Yeah. And then you mentioned earlier entrepreneurship. Like I feel similar background. It wasn't a podunk town in Michigan, but everybody worked for big companies, it seemed. My dad worked for one of the automakers for 40 years. And I wasn't exposed to entrepreneurship until business school. And that was really eye-opening of like, oh, wait, yeah. At some point, these companies have to get started. And that's a whole interesting challenge to apply your problem solving to. And that's where I think engineering tees you up for all sorts of other careers. That structured thinking.
Yeah. And, I have yet to be proven wrong on something that you basically just validated yet again. And that is that I'm going to call the social engineers who end up not loving the discipline of engineering in practice make excellent entrepreneurs. And it tends to be because of the problem solving, the analytical thinking paired with strong curiosity and communication skills that create a real hotbed for ideation plus implementation. Yeah. And so you validated that. I've seen it happen quite a lot. And it's interesting you bring up the business school thing because, I had friends in business school in college, and I don't even know that entrepreneurship was a through line there because again, it was all focused on going to work for Fortune 500s or really large scale established businesses. And I think that while entrepreneurship has existed for a long time, it's become slightly more accessible and available, and we're aware of it more as a career path than we were before, thanks to all the technology that supports it and just the environment that we live in and work in now.
Yeah, it's been kind of professionalized and become a bit of an academic discipline in and of itself. And Carnegie Mellon nowadays is known for robotics, and I'm sure there are all kinds of robotics startups still coming out of Carnegie Mellon.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I still remember when I was there, the big thing was we had wireless on campus because they invented it. But it was like this whole thing where you had to have a special little card and you had to go to the special rooms where there was that same kind of like, it was like this closed like wireless thing. Yeah. So it was definitely that also, I think, predisposed me. And one of the reasons it's a favorite mistake is that predisposed me to high technology adoption and curiosity, which is definitely useful as we've moved from traditional to digital and now digital to AI age.
Yeah. So were there steps in between the engineering job and transferring and starting career benders? Were there other entrepreneurial steps along the way?
This would be the chapter 4 through 8 of the roller coaster that is the career change. Yeah. So I left engineering in the summer of 2010 on the heels of the Great Recession, which had pretty much wrecked the industry. And it was that 2-year period. I moved to Colorado and started work in the office here on September 8th of 2008. And so a week later, Lehman Brothers crashed, and everything that they had set me up to do, working with people, being a project manager, kind of fell by the wayside because the work did too. And I stuck it out for a little while, but it was like, hey, you're an intern again, doing CAD in a cubicle, staring outside at gorgeous Colorado blue skies. And so that was a little bit of like the wake up call. And I will fully admit that I jumped off that career change precipice with not so much as a little dinky parachute with a hole in it. Mm-hmm. There was no net. It was just, I'm ready, I'm out. And I went on about a year of exploring just really random things. If I'm honest, I took the first opportunity that came my way, and I ran a single artist gallery. If you want baptism by fire, Mark, you go from working for an worldwide engineering firm to running a single artist gallery. She also happened to be a little batshit crazy. But that is where I got my taste of small business and entrepreneurship. And so there was lots of seeds during this kind of period of time, which actually was another 7 years of I ran that gallery. I did some random stuff for a year. I landed in the nonprofit sector, which was never anything that was on my radar. And I spent about 6 years there, 4.5 of which I ended up running an organization as an executive director. And it was a little grassroots, ton of potential, opportunity for all of the entrepreneurial sparks to fly. And so all of those things really set me up to be ready to start my own business in the coaching space. Made a lot of sense. And that's when Career Benders was eventually born 8 years ago.
Yeah. So in that work, are you particularly drawn toward, or are clients drawn toward you? They fit kind of an exact profile, going from engineering or technical fields into something else, or people who are struggling with wanting or feeling like they need to make a transition more broadly?
I think there's a couple different avatars of people who kind of gravitate towards me and my background. One are just technical people in general who either want to develop professionally, level up, or conduct some sort of like very intentional job search, and they might not know how. And they feel like, as a former engineer, I can understand their nerd. And so, I definitely cornered the software technology market since I live in Colorado, which has a huge tech hub. And so that became a really interesting specialty that's been fun, because I am a former engineer who loves people, which means I'm pretty extroverted, working with more introverted, engineers, software engineers and things, and really helping them, build their communication skills and interview skills. And so it's really interesting that I don't have empathy for an introverted engineer who is interviewing. However, I have some compassion and can support the communication style. So that was one. Yeah. That's definitely been one. But then the other has been, I would say, people who are driven to find something more meaningful and intentional. And so it's more of like a psychographic driver there, and what they're seeking, or the solution to that hole, could be lots of things. It could be a career change. And many times it's actually stepping into a business of their own. And that's a really fun exploration to go through with somebody, to help them develop awareness, understand like the values and drivers behind that need for meaning and intention, and to create something, design something really, really intentional, integrated with life.
Yeah. So I want to step back and play word nerd for a minute, because I'm an engineer who's also a word nerd. And I want to call out how you said, I think the difference between empathy and compassion, and saying you don't have empathy for these introverted engineers, meaning it's hard to put yourself in their shoes, being an extrovert. Doesn't mean you don't care. Caring is.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And that, to me, that's where I think that we need more empathy in this world, but it can only go so far if you can't directly understand the experience. But that's where compassion and sympathy come in to meet it. I can't put myself in your shoes because there is just a blocker there that doesn't enable me to fully step into understanding you, even though I'd really want to. However, I have compassion for those differences and want to help you kind of like bridge the gap and strengthen them.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that I just wanted to close the loop on that, because without I think the word empathy and sympathy that sometimes get confused. And so say, well, I don't have empathy. Like, oh, that sounds bad. But no, that's realistic. I think in certain situations you want to have it, but sometimes we can only stretch the boundaries of putting ourselves in someone else's shoes so far.
I agree. But I also think that to some extent, that doesn't mean that you can use that as an excuse, right? There's still ways to figure out kind of how to understand each other despite those things. And I think that's important. I think that's definitely a foundation of the work that I do in helping individuals understand themselves at, a deeper level so that they can carry that forward into a career or a vocation that's going to be kind of really aligned, but also serve the people that they're empathetic and sympathetic to as well.
Sure. So let's talk about the book. And again, we're talking to Angie Callen. The book is Scary Good and subtitled Discovering Life Beyond the Sunday Scaries. It begs the question, I mean, it's an interesting phrase. What are Sunday Scaries?
Anecdotally, it's really fun to title your book Scary Good, because then I have people like you that's like, we're going to talk about the Scary Good book. It's a scary good book. Sunday Scaries have become let's say a corporate term or a workforce term for Sunday night anxiety, fear of the week, dreading Mondays. And whether you know the term or not, statistically speaking, just about everybody experiences it. And actually, on average, it's 36 times a year. Just so you know, I am a math person. There are 52 Sundays a year. And so 3 out of 5, 60% of the time, we are allowing Mondays to ruin our Sundays.
It's closer to 70%.
It actually is. Thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah.
I couldn't help it. Sorry.
When we get into the actual details of 36 versus 52. Thank you. Sorry, Dad. But basically, essentially we allow Mondays to come in and like steal Sundays, steal the weekends. And really, to me, it's not whatever you want to call it, Sunday night anxiety, dread the week, Sunday scaries. To me, it's really about this idea that if that is happening to you 36 times a year, I would say even more than 3.6 times a year, there's something in your work and life combination that is out of whack and out of alignment. And this is becoming more common to have those things integrate versus the clock in, clock out 9 to 5 mentality of like baby boomers in the old school workforce, but there's still a gap in things coming up to meet that. And so really the book explores what it does mean to have the Sunday scaries and go on a journey to alleviating them.
Mm-hmm. And what are some of the common symptoms of Sunday scaries where it becomes a problem? Because I'm sure like if you spend a couple of minutes before bed looking at your calendar, thinking ahead, that's probably not a problem. But does it become a problem when it starts hijacking your Sunday and instead of relaxing and enjoying whatever else you're worried about Monday?
Yeah. And when it turns into like true kind of anxiety or inability to be present right now because of what is coming then, I've had people that are like, I just want my joy back. Right. And they feel like it's actually taken their joy. That to me is when this is a problem and more systemic than situational.
Yeah.
And it's a totally different mentality to say, I'm going to intentionally sit down on Sunday and spend 15 minutes planning my Monday so that the other 3 hours of my evening are not disrupted by Monday, than it is to sit there and potentially like start doom scrolling your work inbox because you're afraid of what's going to pop up, or start dreading the stand up that you probably have at 8:30 because everyone thinks that's a great idea now to have a stand up at 8:30 in the morning every day. And so I think it's really about how often it happens and how significantly it detracts you from being able to be present and enjoy a moment, for fearing what's to come.
And what are the situations where somebody needs help managing the symptoms versus looking for more of the root cause, being like, am I in the wrong role? Should I step away from a management role and go back to being a technical contributor? Is it the wrong career? Is it just the wrong company? That's where
it could be any or all of those things. And in a way, I explore a lot of those in the book because I think I experienced most of them. Yeah. I experienced doing the wrong thing in maybe a company that could have been the right place in engineering if I had changed capacities, to doing the right thing in the wrong place, to having both completely off, right? Like there's a lot of, I think, different combinations of things, but a lot of it comes down to your individual values and purpose and making sure that that is aligned and intentional in our work. We are very, very susceptible to this idea of falling into default, I a lot of times will refer to it as mediocrity. That it's just like, okay, well, this is the path I'm on. I'm going to accept it. I got the golden handcuffs. I can't change, because we choose not to explore the opportunity to make a change and have something more intentional. And so in my mind, if you are just fine, you are leaving a whole lot of life on the table.
And, I'm just thinking back to, or just thinking about, the type of help, or it could be both career coach or, a therapist. I mean, 20 some years ago, I was very unhappy in a job at a company at the time. And through the company EAP program, ended up talking to a therapist. And it didn't take very long where, I mean, she was blunt. Like, the things you're talking about aren't a you problem. Like, she wasn't saying it was perfect, but she's like, you wouldn't believe how many leaders at all levels from this company have the same situation. And she was pretty much saying, like, you need a career coach, not a therapist.
Yeah. And, there's a lot of correlation back and forth there, because I think that we either don't realize, we're not aware, or we don't want to admit that we might be in a career or a job or a place that isn't a fit. And so we automatically think it's us. And obviously we have a role to play in that. And that's where we'll seek out therapy. Like, what is wrong with me? And the number of times I've had people come and they'll say, my therapist said I need a career coach because this career or this job or this company is just so out of alignment. I'm never going to be satisfied. That is more common than you would think. And if I look at it as, here's a good little maybe tool for all of you: red light, yellow light, green light. If you are red light satisfied in your day to day, at least 60% of the time, you're green light. I'm sorry. If you are green light satisfied, the majority of the time you're doing something right. If you're, let's say, no more than half the time moderately satisfied, you're doing okay. If the majority of your days are falling in the red zone, if you have more than one red zone day a week consistently, it's time to do something about it. Now, that could be, I need to make a change. But then there's also the flip side of might be something I have to change. And these are things that we explore around the idea of like perfectionism, for instance. Do you actually need to establish and maintain better boundaries in the workplace so that you don't have the Sunday scaries? Now, whether you're able to actually do that based on the company environment is a totally different question. However, there are aspects of things that we are definitely good about putting on ourselves, and pressures that we put on ourselves that sometimes we need to reframe and change the perspective on in order to look at things differently. And then sometimes it really isn't about us. And sometimes it's a combination of the two.
Do you often, I mean, it sounds like there could be a good referral network or pathway back and forth. I mean, sometimes, being an engineer, not a therapist, do you make the suggestion of maybe also reaching out to a mental health professional and realizing there's no shame in that?
Yeah, because just as much as the flip side has happened where a therapist is like, hey, this ain't clinical, deal with the skeletons in your closet. You need to go make some proactive actions. Yeah. The reverse has also happened where I sometimes joke, by the way, that I have like an honorary after 10 plus years of coaching, you pick up on your threshold moves a little bit, but there is a level of clinical intervention I am not equipped, not licensed, and will not cross. And what I have found is there is a group of people who wait too long to make a change. And they'll get to the point where they choose a career coach as their intervention, but they're so far over the curve that mentally and emotionally, they're not able to grasp the idea of change or think about possibilities or really have any hope. And so at that point, they're just not coachable. And I don't mean that from like, you're never going to be coachable, but in this moment, you need more of a clinical intervention to work through psychological barriers that are keeping you from being in a mindset that can make career coaching successful.
And there might be a lower barrier where people might say, well, yeah, everyone needs a career coach. And some people still put, I think it's unfair expectation of, like, well, I shouldn't need a therapist, or there's something wrong with it. There's still some of that where to some people, it's harder to pick up the phone or go to the website to book an appointment at a therapist.
Yes, there's a stigma. And what's interesting is that is continuing and maybe even moving further in the coaching direction. There's some statistics and some studies out there that people are more likely to seek out coaching instead of therapy because of the stigma. One, the stigma around it, but also two, the difference between the two very fundamentally is therapy is about overcoming and dealing and reconciling things of the past that impact the present. Whereas coaching is very much about starting with where you're at and making a plan to move forward, which is why they're great pairs for each other. But that's also why sometimes one is, needs to take priority over the other. And I don't think there should be a stigma, but but sometimes people feel like, oh, it is socially more acceptable to go to a coach, but also they know they want to focus on the future instead of maybe rehashing or revisiting the past. So I think it's really about understanding yourself and choosing the resource that's right for you in the moment and not the one that, looks the best on paper.
Yeah. Your podcast is No More Mondays. It makes me think of the movie Office Space.
Yes, because that's what it was inspired by.
Mondays.
That's what it was. Yeah. That's totally. I could still vividly remember the day we were trying to come up with a name for the podcast. Yeah. And it was like, we were like at the hour mark of strategizing different names. And then all of a sudden somebody said something about like a movie quote. I was like, okay, wait, what are movie quotes about Mondays? Wait, what's that movie quote? What's the Office Space? Case of the Mondays, No More Mondays. And it just clicked like that. So I appreciate that that's what that triggered.
And you got to say it that way. The Mondays.
The Mondays. Exactly. Oh, but, that movie. I don't know how many times I watched that movie when I was an early career-ite.
Same here. And it holds up. I think it's been 20 years.
Oh, I think it was now. It might have been 99.
25.
I think it was 25.
Yes.
I mean, the TPS report will live on in infamy as meaning something to someone.
Yes. There's so much.
There may or may not be a reference to that in my book, by the way.
Yeah.
Like in the first 2 paragraphs.
Well, so the Mondays, having a case of the Mondays is so related to the Sunday Scaries. And, I'm also thinking back to somebody you wouldn't know, a mentor of mine who he was much older and he's passed away, but, he was an idealist and he would, he would raise the point of, why don't you ever hear anyone saying, thank God it's Monday. I'm excited to go to work. And it's just would you agree that that's kind of sadly rare?
Yes. And it's I've had people on the show who talk about the fact that they actually do get excited about Mondays. And that's the whole idea is to really explore the way we live and work now and to make sure that we're doing it on our terms and intentionally. And if you have done that, you will have no more Mondays. Not because you aren't waiting for the end of the week, but just because it doesn't matter what day it is, right? Like, okay, it's Monday. I get to do my most important purposeful work. It's Friday. I get to go mountain bike and play in the mountains. Yeah. But one doesn't necessarily carry more excitement or weight than the other. They just are really integrated. And I have this theory that I think really backs up the idea of not having Sunday Scaries and not having No More Mondays. And that is that work should complement your life, not compete with it. And if you can create that ecosystem, then you look at Mondays and Sunday nights and every day of the week with a completely different lens.
Yeah. We talk about the way things are now. I was going to ask about generational differences, either in your coaching clients or as you might have, come across in researching and working on the book. And like, to me, it's all, I think some of these things get confused of like, well, is it this new generation that has a different view, or does the older generation forget what it was like to be younger? Right? Is it an early stage career factor versus being generation whatever? But like, what are there some key differences in the the likelihood of having the Sunday Scaries, or they're having a different tolerance for that, where they might say, no, this isn't right, I got to make a change. I think previous generations would maybe kind of suffer through a career for the stability with the company and things that the quote unquote the young people now aren't as willing to do. What do you think?
You have good intuition because I talk about this in the book. And that is that before I get there, generally speaking, I think that there's an interesting convergence of factors and variables happening all at once that are shifting the future of work. And with older generations, let's call that older Gen X and baby boomers, there were societal norms where go to work Monday through Friday, have your Jell-O at night, put kids to bed, have a 30-minute of life, and basically live once you get your pension at 62 and a half was normal because that's what the working world supported. And what I talk about in the book is the fact that those people didn't have the Sunday Scaries because they weren't aware enough to have them, right? They almost like didn't exist because there was no really other way to be other than to kind of work for the man and then retire and get your pension. Well, guess what? I ain't got no pension.
Right.
So not only am I going to work longer, I would like to live and do fun things outside with 45-year-old knees instead of 65-year-old knees.
Sure.
And so I think that not only was that the way of corporate America at the time, but then the Great Recession with the introduction of millennials to the workforce at the exact moment we were in a digital transformation radically changed the way we work. And we're experiencing again now with the transition from digital to AI. And so all of that is allowing more autonomy and agency in the workforce paired with generations who demand and seek it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, it's hard to untangle all of those different variables other than recognizing there's a huge change that affects very middle Gen X.
Yes. And so I am the youngest Gen X you can be. I was born in December of 1980. So I am 21 days the youngest Gen X you can be, which is an interesting place to sit in the exact, this is why you actually like opened a can of worms. I think generational stuff is so fascinating. And it's an interesting place to sit for somebody like me because I can see a lot of different perspectives. There's an empathy factor here to call that back where I was raised by baby boomers and I have an older sister and I grew up in the country. So my exposure to technology was very late. And so I have very strong Gen X tendencies, but I am influenced by the proximity of millennials. So I think about myself as like a Gen Xer with millennial tendencies, which means I'm not quite as skeptical and emo, but I got some good snark. However, I'm a little hopeful.
Yeah.
And because of my age, I wasn't established enough in the workforce when the Great Recession hit to lose a ton. We don't talk about the 401k that isn't RIP anymore. But I also remember it and was impacted by it. But I also had to adopt technology very early in my career, or else I wouldn't have been in an engineering school. You know, you're equipped for it, but it didn't matter. Now I'm mid-career. And whether I'm a business owner or not, I am at a point where I have to adopt and adapt to the shift from digital to AI because I'm not old enough to retire.
Yeah.
And so it's just an interesting place to sit because it feels like we're going through a cycle again after 20 years of all of these economics, generational, and technical factors impacting kind of the way we work. And what's really interesting to me is how that changes the actual work environment and how we lead and how we interact with teams, because you've got that whole spread working together. And you might have a 54-year-old leader who has great communication skills and doesn't understand jack about AI and has to give autonomy, freedom, and empower their 23-year-old new grad who came on the team to just run with something that they don't understand, right? It's such an interesting dynamic, and it's really going to change the way we interact within teams and work cultures into the future.
So this introduces more triggers for Sunday Scaries.
Yes, it does.
All of this change. And it only speeds up, it seems.
Yeah, this world is definitely not slowing down. Yeah. And I think the way that we are working is evolving just as quickly with it. And I think that the opportunity that we have with that is to be way more intentional, thoughtful, and deliberate about how we work and live versus just working to live.
Yeah. So maybe one last question for you, Angie. And again, to recap, Angie Callen, Her company is Career Benders. The book is Scary Good, Discovering Life Beyond the Sunday Scaries. And the podcast is No More Mondays. As an author, I like to talk about writing process, and the book is as a startup, and you iterate and you explore and you work on it. Usually, you've got a strong thesis when you start to write a book, but what's something you learned along the way that surprised you, or something you came to believe that wasn't really on your radar before starting the book?
You actually said something at the very beginning in your intro of me that I think falls into that category. Confidence is built through action. And let me give you the backstory to that. So I have been, let's say, attempting or thinking or trying, whatever word you want to throw at it, to write a book for about 4 or 5 years. About 3.5 years ago, I hammered out a 20,000 word, just here's my life chronology in a weekend. And then I sat here and I'm like, who am I? I have no name to write just a straight up memoir. And that really wasn't what I wanted it to do. And so I was having a hard time figuring out, the best way to put it is, what's the cover? What's my common thread? Who am I trying to write this book for? And what's the context of the story? Side note, I write a weekly newsletter called Combating the Sunday Scaries. And we just had our 200th episode. And so about 6 months prior to the 200th edition of this newsletter, it hit me and smacked me in the face. Yeah. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm about to have this 200th edition. I have this life story that I want to tell, but I want to make it useful to somebody. There's the cover. You already have an audience and you already have a perspective on these Sunday Scaries. And what was really cool is I took, from a process perspective, the 140 or whatever editions that were already existed, mashed them up and teased out common themes. Sure. And what was so fascinating to find out is what I'm actually talking about distilled down into 12 points in all these different factors. And the one that surprised me the most was building confidence through action, because I fully believe that and have experienced that in many, many different facets, from just trying a new job to starting a business to learning how to mountain bike at almost age 43. And so it was almost validating of oh, wow, everything I talk about really does support this theory. And here it is loud and clear.
Yeah. Because I think whether it's writing, how does one become a writer? You have to write. And how does one become a podcaster? I love the advice of, you've got to be willing to do podcast episodes and release episodes that are terrible, because everyone's terrible when they start to some degree, right? And at some point, you've got to do it. And, I think I love that phrase, thinking back to the intro, confidence through action. You can't think your way into being a better writer.
And, and I hadn't planned to do this, but you just helped bring this whole conversation full circle, because if we're sitting here talking about our favorite mistakes, if you have the confidence to act, you can be sure there's going to be a mistake in there. However, if you look at a mistake as a learning experience instead of a failure, it's a completely different animal. One of the things I actually say in my book is that failure, loosely translated, is learning experience. And unfortunately, I think fail has become an ugly 4-letter word in society today. But honestly, in actuality, we don't grow and we don't learn unless sometimes these mistakes happen, which is why we can have favorite ones that actually end up pushing us forward.
Yeah. That is a perfect note to end things on. So again, Angie Callen, thank you for being here today. Check out the show notes for links to the book, website, podcast, all of that. So as I said up front, it seemed like you were in the perfect place with the right attitude for this podcast. That turned out to be very true. So thank you again for joining us and sharing some of your story with us.
Thank you for having me. And I agree. A lot of alignment. And I appreciate having a place to come and talk about all the things that I'm passionate about. So thank you.
Thanks, Ken. As always, I want to thank you for listening. I hope this podcast inspires you to reflect on your own mistakes, how you can learn from them or turn them into a positive. I've had listeners tell me they started being more open and honest about mistakes in their work. And they're trying to create a workplace culture where it's safe to speak up about problems, because that leads to more improvement and better business results. If you have feedback or a story to share, you can email me, myfavoritemistakepodcast@gmail.com. And again, our website is myfavoritemistakepodcast.com.